Thomas the Tank Engine and Friends is based on the Railway series by the Reverend W. Awdry. You'll find this written at the start of every episode and special of Thomas and Friends, but out of the nearly 600 episodes of the show, less than 100 of those stories originated from the Railway series books. This means that many of the characters introduced in Thomas and Friends, especially later on, were created specifically for the show with no direct inspiration from the original books. Many people have come up with interpretations for how certain TV series characters could have worked within the world established in the books, and even I have dabbled in this before, but today I'm going to pick 3 engines created for the TV series and draw them in the Railway series style. It's drawing time. I figured that Salty would be a fitting start for this video. He was introduced in an era still considered by many to be classic, and continued to appear regularly as a supporting character throughout the remainder of the show, even surviving beyond the original series and making it into All Engines Go. Salty was first introduced in the show's 6th series, and while Season 5 was the first one to completely forego Awdry stories in favour of original stories and new characters, Season 6 always felt more like the start of a new era to me. It was the first season of the show to use a larger team of writers, in contrast to just Britt Allcroft, David Mitton and David Maidment. Speaking on a more personal level, it was also the first season of the show I vividly remember coming out. I somehow missed the original marketing and launch of Season 5 on VHS, and only found out about it through watching the episodes on Nick Jr., by which point they were about a year old. In the TV series, Salty loves working by the sea but is initially brought to Sodor to work at the quarry in order to help with an important job. Salty is upset, but maintains a positive outlook and proves to work very well with the trucks. When his job is complete, the Fat Controller gives Salty a new job at Brendam Docks, for which he is very grateful. I'm thinking that Salty's backstory would be similar in the books. He is initially purchased by the Farquhar Quarry Company, maybe to help with an extension project. Toby and Mavis grow very fond of him and are sympathetic towards his longing for working by the sea again. When the job is complete and Salty is surplus to requirements, Toby and Mavis try and persuade the Fat Controller to purchase Salty, only to find out that he already has. Salty is appointed as shunter at Brendam Docks, where there is lots for him to do. When Bill and Ben meet him for the first time, they decide to play a prank on him, as is customary at this point. They get the China clay wagons all riled up so that they'll trip Salty up, only to discover that Salty's good nature and knack for singing sea shanties has calmed the trucks down completely. Bill and Ben are amazed, and decide that any engine that can keep the clay trucks in order is an engine worthy of their respect. The 3 engines eventually become great friends. Salty's basis is the British Railways Class 07, which were originally built in the early 1960s. It's evident that Salty isn't brand new when he arrives on Sodor, since he's familiar with how to handle trucks and has a vast mental backlog of stories to tell. The 07s were originally built for shunting at Southampton Docks, but my idea is that Salty was drafted to various docks and harbours during his time on the other railway, exchanging stories with other engines, employees, as well as the ships and boats that he's met over the years. The 07s were withdrawn from service during the 1970s, with the last going in 1977. My guess would be that Salty arrived on Sodor around this time. When he was purchased by the Fat Controller, Salty was sent to Crovan's Gate Works to get a new coat of paint. Salty chose maroon, and this is why I theorised that Salty may have gotten around during his time on the other railway. During the 1960s and 1970s, most BR diesel engines wore green and later blue. The Western region, however, liked to do things a bit different and painted several of their engines in a rich maroon colour. My guess is that Salty spent some time working somewhere in the West Country and was partial to the livery worn by his shed mates. It may even help to explain his accent in the TV series, other than the standard cliche of pirate equals West Country accent. Salty also requested to have his original running number reinstated. He claimed that this was D2991, although much like Duck and Oliver's running numbers, it is doubtful as to whether or not this is the number he wore when he was first built. His official Northwestern Railway number is likely D4. As mentioned in my video on the coffee pots, my theory regarding the colour of the engine's faces, whether they be grey or the main body colour, depends on whether the front contains a door for steam engines or a grille for diesel engines. Given that the Class 07s had grills on the front of their bonnet, it tracks that Salty would retain his grey face from the TV series. With all that said, here is the finished illustration. Harvey is another character who made his debut in the 6th series of Thomas and Friends. In the show, he is frequently depicted as a recovery vehicle, always ready to help clear up a mess or put a derailed engine back on the track. However, in real life, crane engines weren't really used for this purpose. In actuality, they were used in industrial complexes, generally transferring loads or lifting heavy machinery. Interestingly, there is a precedent for Harvey belonging to an industrial complex in the TV series. His character bio for Merchandise, the official website, and even the 2003 Writer's Bible claims that Harvey's true home is the Sodor Waterworks. This never featured in any episode of the series nor any maps of Sodor. It figures that Sodor probably would have a waterworks, and waterworks were sometimes served by railways, mainly to bring coal to the complex to fuel the boilers, as well as salt and chlorine for the water softening plant. These railways were usually narrow gauge, but I'm sure a standard gauge one could feasibly exist as well. As for why they'd need a crane engine specifically, it could be that Harvey is used to help install and replace machinery, as well as to lift crates of equipment out of trucks, as I've depicted in this drawing. As for a location, I've decided to place the waterworks in Peel Godred, a large urban area near the river Howyn Ab, and not far from the lakes of Dubbin Moor, Corlowie and Lowie Machen. The line to the waterworks, sometimes affectionately known as Harvey's branch line, branches off the line to the Sodor Aluminium Company. As well as working at the complex, Harvey will use this stretch of line to deliver coal, salt and chlorine to the waterworks. In his own words, "I'm not just a crane, I'm an engine too." I've kept Harvey's design mostly the same as it is in the TV series, albeit a little more accurate to his basis, that's the Dub's crane tank if you're curious, and instead of this number 27 I've added the initials of the Sodor Waterworks. My logic is that even if Harvey wasn't the first engine owned by the company, I highly doubt they went through 26 engines before him. Harvey first appeared in the episode Harvey to the Rescue. It's not a terrible episode, although I feel as though the moral isn't the strongest. Clickbait articles that paint Thomas and Friends in a negative light often put forward the notion that the original Thomas stories are made to deliver the authoritarian message that the only important thing is to be useful. Now this is a very superficial and bad faith reading of the original stories, but I feel as though Harvey to the Rescue is maybe the closest the show has actually got to featuring this moral. Harvey gets picked on by the other engines for being different, which makes him feel sad. Then he comes to Percy's rescue after a derailment occurs, and then the other engines like him because his difference came in useful. Compare this to Thomas, Terence and the Snow, a similar story written by the Reverend Audrey. Thomas is rude to Terence the tractor due to his caterpillar tracks, but learns how useful they can be when Terence rescues him in a snowdrift. I think this story is better because Thomas's view on caterpillar tracks feels more like childish confusion rather than mocking Terence for being different. And we all know how blunt little kids can be. There's also the fact that Thomas only got stuck in the snow because of his own recklessness, destroying his snowplow because he thought it was uncomfortable, even though it would have prevented the accident from happening. The moral is much more about following the precautions implemented to keep you safe. Thomas learning about how cool caterpillar tracks are is just a fun bonus. Going back to Harvey, if I were to rewrite his introductory story, it would probably involve another engine, maybe Percy, coming to help out at the waterworks during the busy months. Percy is perplexed at Harvey's crane arm, and after Harvey gives a quick demonstration, Percy still isn't convinced that cranes are a particularly worthwhile addition to engines, and thinks Harvey is showing off. The hot weather makes the trucks even more irritable than usual, making them more troublesome. Harvey has a hard time as he brings the coal trucks to the waterworks, and warns Percy to be careful. Percy thanks him for the advice but is secretly self-assured, believing that he's good with trucks. When it's his turn to bring the coal to the waterworks, he loses control and derails, sending coal spilling out of the trucks. Harvey helps out, first by helping to reroute Percy, and then uses a bucket attachment to collect the spilt coal and feed it to the waterworks boiler. Percy is abashed, and decides that Harvey is an engine worth taking advice from, not one that needs to be taken down a peg. With mentoring from Harvey, Percy proves to be a big help to the waterworks, and by the time Percy is ready to go back home, the two engines are firm friends. And so, here is the completed drawing. Emily is an interesting case. Not only was she the first female steam engine to appear in the TV series, not counting Lady since she'd only appeared in Magic Railroad by that point, but she would also go on to become a main character. Since then, she's been a point of contention for fans of the show, with many a discussion about her personality, her basis, and what characters she may or may not have replaced. Over the years, there's been a lot of discussion over whether or not Emily could be incorporated into the Railway series canon. In recent years, information was revealed about an engine called Bloomer, which the Reverend Audrey created for his Farquhar model layout, but never featured him in the books. The story goes that the Fat Controller discovered an old engine thought to have been scrapped in a rundown shed in Scotland during the early 1970s, and brought him to Sodor to be restored and let out again for rail tours. Emily's basis, the Stirling singles, were Victorian-era engines that were all withdrawn by 1916. Realistically, I don't think any of Sodor's pre-grouping railways would have had the necessary resources to acquire and run a Stirling single, and whilst the North Western Railway may have been able to obtain one in its early years, they probably wouldn't have wanted a design so antiquated. So I think the preservation route a la Bloomer is the way to go. When Emily was initially withdrawn by the Great Northern Railway, her crew had grown so attached to her that they didn't have the heart to send her for scrap. They were able to convince the railway board to sell her instead, and she was purchased by a light railway in Scotland. She worked there for a number of years, primarily pulling passenger trains and the occasional goods work. This couldn't last forever, however, and eventually the line closed. With the railway preservation movement still a good few decades away, there were even fewer buyers interested in Emily than before. She did eventually get bought by a colliery, but not for shunting trucks or hauling freight. Emily was turned into a stationary boiler and would stay that way up until the 1960s, by which point she had become abandoned. Now that the railway preservation movement had begun, people were interested in the prospect of a second Stirling single being preserved, but most preservation groups did not have the necessary resources to restore a stationary boiler back into the locomotive it once was. The Fat Controller, on the other hand, had Crovan's Gate Works. He purchased what was left of Emily and had her restored to her original condition. A few years later, Emily emerged from the works resplendent in her GNR green livery with the number 777. Despite the hardships she's gone through over the years, she considers herself lucky and believes that her number may have played a part in that. Emily was put into service for Heritage Rail Tours, and the first of these was on Thomas's branch line. Some new coaches waiting at the Farquhar carriage shed were brought to Sodor specifically for Emily, but due to a mix-up she took Annie and Clarabelle instead. Thomas was running late helping Percy at the harbour, and both the station staff and Thomas's passengers assumed that Emily was simply hauling the regular train of the morning. When Thomas returned, the only coaches left in the carriage shed were the rail tour coaches. The enthusiasts arrived around this time and were livid when they saw Thomas at the head of their train instead of the Stirling single they were promised. Thomas was upset. First another engine comes and takes his coaches, and now a crowd of people are angry with him. Eventually the situation was sorted. The two engines exchanged coaches, and everything was lovely once again. Wonderful. Thomas and Emily still didn't see eye to eye for a while. Being a very old engine, Emily knew best, or so she thought, and would often boss Thomas around if she thought he wasn't giving it his all. Thomas didn't appreciate this, and would often give Emily a bit of cheek in response. Eventually, the two engines began to understand that it was better to work with one another than against one another, and the two of them became good pals. And here is the finished picture. And there we are, 3 engines created for Thomas and Friends, drawn and written as Railway series characters. I've really enjoyed figuring out how these characters would work in the books and how their personalities would carry over. I only picked 3 engines to draw for this video, but there are so many characters created specifically for the TV series that I could probably make dozens more videos where I reinterpret these characters in a Railway series style. If such a prospect interests you, be sure to comment down below and subscribe for more.